It was early morning on May 17th, 1992, when a jogger passing through a quiet neighborhood in Springfield, Ohio, noticed something strange. The front door of 27-year-old Laura Whitmore's house was wide open. Her car was still in the driveway. The living room lamp was still glowing, but the house was silent. Too silent. The jogger, hesitant but concerned, stepped inside. What they found would change the town forever. Laura Whitmore was lying face down on the kitchen floor. She was barefoot and still wearing her nurse scrubs. Bruises circled her neck. Her hands showed signs of a struggle, defensive wounds. On the table nearby sat a half-eaten breakfast. A single drop of blood smeared the refrigerator handle, and oddly, a rug beneath her foot was bunched up, as if she had tried to run but didn't make it far. There was no forced entry. Nothing appeared stolen. No broken glass. No ransacked drawers. Just a young woman, murdered in her own home for reasons no one could explain. By noon, local news had caught wind of the case. Reporters swarmed the street. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors. The town was in shock. They called her the angel nurse. A sweet, soft-spoken caregiver who had no enemies and no reason to die. But within 48 hours, the police claimed they had their suspect. Laura's fiancé, Thomas Granger, was a 31-year-old mechanic who worked long hours at an auto shop on the edge of town. He was known to be quiet, a bit reserved. He liked working with his hands more than making small talk. When investigators learned that he and Laura had recently argued at a local diner and that he hadn't seen her in 2 days, he was immediately brought in for questioning. Thomas didn't run. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He cooperated with everything. He told police he'd last spoken to Laura 2 days earlier and had been working overnight on a truck. A couple of co-workers confirmed seeing him at the shop that night, but couldn't say for sure how long he stayed. His story wobbled, but it didn't break until the evidence started showing up. Police found traces of Laura's blood in the back of Thomas's truck. He had scratches on his arms. Ones he said came from car parts. Then came the kicker. An anonymous phone tip claimed a man matching Thomas's description had been seen leaving Laura's house at around 4 a.m., wearing a hoodie and looking nervous. With a grieving town demanding answers and media pressure mounting, police arrested Thomas Granger and charged him with first-degree murder. The courtroom was packed. Local television aired the trial like it was primetime drama. Laura's mother cried on the witness stand, saying her daughter had been thinking about ending the engagement. The prosecution painted Thomas as controlling, jealous, and quietly violent. The defense pointed to his clean record and lack of motive. They asked why a man with no history of violence would suddenly murder the woman he planned to marry. But the jury, composed mostly of older residents who had followed the case from day one, wasn't interested in nuance. After just 6 hours of deliberation, Thomas was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He simply said, "I didn't do this. Someone else did." No one believed him. For the next 30 years, the case was considered closed. Justice had been served. The town moved on. But the truth, it didn't go away. Because the real killer, the man who had taken Laura Whitmore's life, was still out there, hiding in plain sight. And 3 decades later, he would confess everything. But that's a story for the next chapter. October 1992. Correctional Institution, Chillicothe, Ohio. They took away his name and replaced it with a number. Hashtag 8318520. Thomas Granger, 31 years old, former mechanic, now convicted murderer, stepped into his prison cell carrying nothing but a box of court papers, a toothbrush, and a photo of the woman he was accused of killing. From that day forward, every sunrise looked the same. Concrete, steel, and silence. For the next 30 years, Thomas Granger became a ghost. No one believed him, not even God. Inside prison, everyone says they're innocent. So when Thomas tried to tell his story, that he was framed, that he didn't kill Laura Whitmore, no one listened. Not the guards, not the chaplain, not even the other inmates. They just shrug and say, "Sure, man, you and everyone else." But Thomas wasn't like the others. He didn't fight. He didn't join a gang. He kept to himself. He wrote letters, hundreds of them, to lawyers, reporters, innocence projects, state officials, talk show hosts. No one wrote back. Eventually, he stopped writing letters and started writing everything else. The journal. Each night, he filled the pages of a cheap prison notebook, documenting every memory, every odd detail, every hunch about what really happened to Laura. He wrote about the fight they had days before her murder, about how she told him someone had been watching her at work. He remembered the strange red truck that parked across from their house some nights. He even wrote about Daniel Rusk, the quiet handyman who used to do repairs for Laura's elderly neighbor. Thomas remembered Laura saying once, "That guy gives me the creeps." He never thought much of it until it was too late. But in court, no one had asked about Daniel Rusk. No one cared. The prosecution had already decided who the killer was. The turning point. In 2008, after 16 years behind bars, Thomas received a letter from the Ohio Innocence Project. For the first time, someone agreed to review his case. There was a catch. They needed new evidence or DNA, or something unquestionable. But back in 1992, there wasn't much DNA testing. The bloody fingerprint on the refrigerator? Too smudged. The hair in Laura's hand? Too degraded. The courts had ruled that the evidence was inconclusive. The case remained closed. Another dead end. Another year of silence. A prisoner with a memory too good to ignore. Over time, a few younger inmates started calling Thomas the professor. He was quiet, observant, and knew every case in the prison law library. He helped others with their appeals, but never gave up on his own. Then in 2019, while helping another inmate with a parole case, Thomas stumbled on a legal document, a minor court ruling about deathbed confessions, stating that in Ohio, they could be used to reopen a closed case if the confession was detailed and credible. Thomas smiled for the first time in years. He didn't know it yet, but somewhere out there, someone was dying, and they were about to confess to the crime that stole his life. The final twist of the knife. In 2022, almost exactly 30 years after Laura Whitmore's murder, a priest walked into a hospital room on the other side of Ohio to hear a dying man's final confession. The man's name? Daniel Rusk. And the words that came out of his mouth would blow the case wide open. But Thomas didn't know that yet. Not on that day. He just sat in his cell, staring at the same four walls, writing in the same old journal, still waiting for the world to believe him, still waiting for a truth that was finally coming. April 3rd, 2022, Mercy General Hospital, Dayton, Ohio. Daniel Rusk, 62 years old, was dying, pancreatic cancer, stage 4, morphine drip in his arm, less than 48 hours to live. As the machines beeped softly in the background and his breathing grew slower, Daniel asked to speak to a priest. Not family, not a nurse, just someone who would listen without interrupting. Father Callahan had heard deathbed confessions before. He expected regret, affairs, abandoned children, hidden addictions. But what Daniel whispered in that dim hospital room stopped the priest cold. "I killed her," he said. "Laura Whitmore. I killed her, and they put the wrong man in prison." With tears running down his face, Daniel spilled everything. He told the priest how he'd been working odd jobs in Springfield back in 1992, painting houses, fixing porch steps, cutting lawns for the elderly. He'd done some handyman work next door to Laura's place and had noticed her right away. Too pretty to be walking alone at night, he said. He began watching her, waiting, planning. On May 16th, he saw her come home late. He waited until her lights went out. Then he let himself in through the unlocked back door. He knew the layout from his work next door. When Laura came into the kitchen the next morning, he startled her. She screamed. He panicked. He grabbed her, meant only to scare her, but the moment turned violent. She scratched him, kicked him, fought with everything she had. He strangled her. She died with her eyes open. He wiped his fingerprints, took her phone, and left before sunrise, just minutes before the jogger would find the door ajar. He thought he had covered his tracks. When the police arrested Thomas Granger, Daniel couldn't believe his luck. And for the next 30 years, he lived with that silence, But dying has a way of washing away fear. And now, with time running out, he wanted to make it right. Father Callahan, shaken, wrote everything down. With Daniel's written and signed permission, the priest handed the document over to law enforcement. At first, no one took it seriously, but then the fingerprints came back. The ones smudged on Laura's fridge. With modern tech, they were reanalyzed and they matched Daniel Rusk. A hair strand from Laura's hand, once inconclusive, was retested. Daniel's DNA. His name had never been run before. He was a drifter. No prior felony charges. Just a quiet handyman who lived under the radar. Suddenly, Thomas Granger's journal wasn't the rant of a desperate man. It was a key to his freedom. On August 18, 2022, Thomas Granger stood before a courtroom once again. This time, the judge said, "Mr. Granger, we owe you an apology that words cannot fulfill." The charges were dismissed. His record expunged. After 10,950 days behind bars, Thomas walked out of prison a free man. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just whispered, "Thank you," and looked up at the sky, as if speaking to someone who wasn't there. Thomas had lost everything. His youth, his career, the woman he loved. The town that once branded him a monster now called him a martyr. Reporters begged for interviews. Book deals were offered. True crime podcasts lit up with his story. But Thomas wasn't interested in fame. He just wanted the world to know. Justice delayed isn't justice served. It's justice stolen. And sometimes, it takes a dying man's whisper to bring the truth back from a grave. August 20th, 2022, 2 days after his release. Columbus, Ohio. Thomas Granger stood in front of a hotel mirror, staring at a face he barely recognized. The deep lines, the tired eyes, the silver in his beard. This wasn't a 31-year-old man who walked into prison. This was someone else. Someone rebuilt in silence. He opened the closet and stared at the clothes the state had given him. A donated button-down, faded jeans, and shoes 2 sizes too big. That was freedom, apparently. Freedom in borrowed skin. He turned off the lights, sat on the edge of the bed, and cried. Not because he was sad. Not because he was happy. But because after 30 years, he didn't know who he was anymore. The first thing that shocked him was the phones. In 1992, phones had cords. They hung on walls. Now, everyone was walking around with little glowing boxes in their hands, staring into them like hypnotized children. He couldn't even cross a street without nearly being hit by a self-driving Uber. Food came by drone. People asked him for his Wi-Fi, and the coffee cost more than he used to make in a whole day. He tried to go back to his old neighborhood in Springfield. It was gone, bulldozed, replaced by condos and Whole Foods. The house he and Laura once shared had been demolished. There wasn't a single piece of his past left. It was like he never existed. Podcasts wanted interviews. TV stations called him the face of justice. One news anchor cried on camera, saying he is a symbol of hope. But Thomas didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted to be a man. They handed him a $2 million compensation check. Ohio's way of saying our bad. He deposited it without smiling, because money couldn't buy back his mother's funeral, or the years he didn't hold his nieces and nephews, or the quiet Sundays with Laura on the porch. 3 weeks after his release, Thomas asked a social worker to help him find where Laura was buried. The cemetery was quiet. No flowers. No fresh soil. Just a small, weathered headstone that read, Laura and Whitmore, 1964 to 1992. Gone too soon. He knelt beside it for almost an hour. Said nothing. When he finally spoke, it wasn't an apology. It was a promise. They forgot about you, but I never will. He left a letter beside her stone. It was from the journal he'd written in for 30 years. The page was dated 2001. I know the world believes I killed you, but I will wait, even if it takes my whole life. One day, the truth will come back, and when it does, I hope you're looking down, because I'll still be waiting, Laura, still loving you. Thomas never remarried, never moved far. He used part of the compensation money to open a community garage. Free repairs for single mothers, elderly folks, and struggling vets. It was quiet work, the kind of work that made him feel useful again. Every Tuesday, he spoke at a high school criminal justice class, not as a victim, but as a man who survived the system. He never told them to hate the law. He told them to question it. Justice, he said, isn't a statue holding a scale. It's a man who waits 30 years for someone to believe him. September 2022, Springfield, Ohio. 6 weeks after his release, Thomas Granger received a call from a woman he didn't recognize. Mr. Granger, I think I have something that belongs to you. Her name was Susan Albrecht. She was in her 60s now, a retired librarian who had recently been volunteering at the Springfield Public Archives. While sorting through boxes of old donations, she found a small, sealed envelope stuck between the pages of an out-of-print phone book from the early 90s. The name on the front stopped her cold. To Thomas, in case I don't get to say goodbye. Laura, the letter that time buried. The letter was postmarked May 15th, 1992, one day before she was murdered. In the letter, Laura described how she'd been feeling watched for weeks, hearing footsteps outside her house, phone calls with no one on the line, small object in her home being slightly moved. She told Thomas she had planned to go to the police, but was afraid of being laughed off. She even mentioned a man who had done repair work at the neighbor's house, someone she caught staring at her through her kitchen window. If something happens to me, I don't want anyone to think it was you. You're the only one who ever made me feel safe. Please don't stop telling the truth. One day, someone will believe you. It was a letter that could have changed everything, but it never reached him. Somehow, it had slipped into the wrong bin at the post office, then dumped in a donation pile, then buried for 3 decades until now. The final piece of the puzzle. Thomas read the letter in complete silence. He held it like it was glass, fragile and holy. He didn't cry this time. He just folded it back into its envelope, sealed it again, and whispered, "You always believed in me, even when the world didn't." He took it to his lawyer, and together they submitted it as evidence of wrongful conviction withheld. The letter made national headlines. Victim warned a real killer in letter hidden for 30 years, sparking new legislation around inmate appeals and unrecovered evidence. Some called it fate, some called it a miracle, but Thomas knew what it really was. Proof that she never doubted him. Not once. The twist no one expected. Months later, a DNA test connected Daniel Rusk, the real killer, to 2 other cold cases from the 1980s. The ripple of his deathbed confession began to shake loose stories no one had even connected before. And yet, Laura's letter remained the most powerful thing Thomas ever held. It wasn't just a goodbye. It was her final defense of the man everyone had condemned. The legacy she left behind. Today, that letter is framed in Thomas's modest garage office, above the workbench where he fixes brakes and tunes engines for free. Every time someone new asks about it, he simply says, "That's the letter that brought me back to life." Now tell me, if you were Thomas and found a letter that could have saved your life 30 years ago, what would you do with it? Backhand index pointing down. Let me know in the comments.